It is my pleasure to interview Moises Naim for this episode of Afterwards. You are a noted columnist on international economics and globalization. You are also a scholar at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace and formerly editor of Foreign Policy magazine and former trade minister of Venezuela. So, all that said, you have also now written a new book called The End of Power, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So let's start at the beginning, which I think is, how did you come to write this book? And how did all of those various experiences inform what went into this?
Yeah, delighted to be here, and thank you. And you, in that introduction, you encapsulated many of the. By doing all of those things that you mentioned, I arrived at having an instinct, an intuition about what was going on with power. We all know that power is shifting from west to the east, from north to south, from very big companies to startups, and from people in presidential palaces to people in the streets. We know that that's happening in the world. That's nothing new. But I detected that there was something more profound happening to power, that power was experiencing a mutation that had to do that with power was buying much less than it used to in the past, that people with power could do less with it. That doesn't mean that they're not very powerful. The Pope and the head of the Pentagon and the President of China or Russia or the United States are very powerful people, but they can do less. They're more constrained in what they can do. And therefore, I started looking at that. It also coincided with a period. I had been the editor of Foreign Policy magazine, as you said, for 14 years. And so I was trying to distill what did I learn in those 14 years? What are important trends that came into my mind as I was trying to synthesize, to summarize that experience?
So why don't we stop for a moment, and why don't you tell me a bit more about how you define power? Because I think the definition you lay out in the book is central to your thesis of how it's declining and is different from how we talk about power conversationally today.
Right, and as you know, the power has been discussed since time immemorial, and there are as many definitions, and it can get as complex as you can develop the idea, and it has become very complex. For the book and for the conversations, it's enough to say that power is the ability of one actor to make others do or stop doing something. And influencing, and power and influence are also interrelated. And influence in the book, I use influence as the ability to change the perception of a situation in order to motivate people in terms of moving in a certain direction or stop doing something. And power is just creating incentives, both sticks and carrots, in order to get people to behave in a certain way.
And so how exactly is it declining? Because I think if you asked a lot of people today, they would say, okay, maybe there are new CEOs at the top of organizations, but they're still making enormous paychecks and wield a lot of power. And we see more and more countries who seem to be emerging as strong players on the global stage. So how is that not just a shift and a redistribution of power? How is what we're witnessing actually a decline?
Each one of the players you mentioned, well-paid CEOs, heads of state, new countries that are coming and having into the play in the geopolitics arena and have more say than before. All of these players have power, but they have less power than before. They can do less with it than their predecessors could do. Pick any one of those and you will see that they are more constrained. Think about the CEOs of the banks. After the financial crisis, there were just a few banks that came on top. They were the banks that navigated through the crisis and bought other banks and became, their CEOs became the top leaders in the financial sector. Well, many of those today, just a few years later, have lost their job.